with the agenda.
Okay.
To
I think that we are all set.
See, let's get, eyes are lit up.
There we are.
Okay. Yeah, you don't need to see me.
All right, John, we're all set.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call to order the February 7th Appointments and Negotiations Committee. I'll take attendance. Councilor Johnson.
Here.
Councilor Anderson.
Here.
And I am here, so we're all present and accounted for. We're also accompanied this evening and being supported in Zoom land by Liam Gallagher. We have a couple of agenda items this evening, but before we approve the minutes, I'd like to just talk about the order we're going to try to follow and see if I can get a motion to approve the change to the agenda. Todd Souza and Jamie Fitch will be joining us. We're going to be talking about a couple of committee merger proposals that came to us originally before the holidays. And because of the vacation break and other things getting geared up with the new committees, we've been a little bit slow in moving that on to other, to the council and to other committees if need be. So we're gonna have some discussion about that this evening. So we'll do that first, and then we only have one position to staff this evening. So that's the order we'll follow. And Liam, you had something?
Yeah, I just to provide some further order to the discussion this evening. I really think they're probably two separate discussions. So I would propose that we bring Todd Souza, the Director of Community Services, in to talk about the proposed change to the Community Services Advisory Board charge and composition. And then once that conversation concludes, I would bring Jamie Fitch in, our Sustainability Coordinator, to talk about the proposed merger of the Pest Management and Conservation Commission.
Very well. Thanks very much. And if there are other people that may be joining us virtually, we'll be sure to keep an eye, on that for public comment and also participation as appropriate. So, can I have a motion to make that schedule change?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I'll take a vote on that. Councilor Johnson?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
And I'm also in favor, so we'll make those changes. And with that, I think we can approve the minutes for December 6th. You should have a copy of that.
So moved.
Okay. Any discussion? There was no January meeting, so there are no January minutes. I will take the vote. Councilor Johnson?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
And I also am in favor of those, and I was the author, so that doesn't necessarily mean that
Very
they
good
deserve
job.
approval. They deserve scrutiny.
We didn't meet in jail.
Didn't even notice. Blinked and went right by. So with that, I think we can bring in Todd, if he'd like to lead us off here.
Hey, Todd, can you hear and see us okay?
I can, yeah, thank you. I appreciate you swapping up the agenda. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, surely. So what you should have received, and we had kind of mentioned at a couple of meetings, our Community Service Advisory Board, which is presently the Community Service Rec Advisory Board, has been in discussion about expanding our enrollment. And the charge that was sent really has kind of three pieces to it. One, they are asking to change their present composition from 5 voting members to 7, based on some interest that we have and to capitalize on that momentum. They are asking to then add 2 student representatives, one being a senior in high school and one being a junior, kind of like the school board does, to get some youth input and have a kind of a transitional period there if they want to stay on. And then also in their charge, they've added that section in yellow, which is really that second paragraph. We talked a lot about board composition, and we chatted about who should be on the board and when, and ultimately it's up to the appointments committee, but they wanted to have a statement there just to make mention. And the statement says, this board shall reflect a well-rounded, diverse representation of our community. To best serve the interests of all, the selected board members should strive to meet the intent of this statement. And so Just being having if we do get approved to go to a 7-person board, just to be able to bring recommendations to you, to be able to strive to have a great representation of all the members and citizens of Scarborough. The only other question, and it's not on this piece, but the third part of this would be is that, and I know we're not at that point, but I told them I would bring it up, is that if this proposal was passed, they would make the recommendation to bring Jean Ginn Marvin and Maria Odlin from alternates into those 6th or 7th voting spots, and then allow the appointments committee to backfill the alternates. So that was their third thought of this process, for your conversation and consideration.
Okay. So with this, I would like to just turn to the committee. One thing, we're lucky that we have John Anderson here this evening, who is the liaison to this committee. So, John, would you like to share some additional insights on this and some of your thoughts? Thanks.
So I think this even stems back to a year ago, when I think there was some conversation about potentially consolidating the senior advisory committee along with this committee. At the time, the committee said they thought they should remain separate. That conversation, I think, came back again of, how do we make sure that the committee is a little bit more broader and more inclusive of the community. I think there was some recognition, and this was prior to our vote of putting on new committee members, I think, that there maybe wasn't as much parent representation on the committee. You didn't necessarily have, young adults offering programming ideas for young adults in that committee. So given that community services really does support all demographics, all age groups, they felt like it was important to have more spots to try and allow for a broader base of demographics to participate in the community. I would say probably now it probably trends more to, senior demographics, and trying to bring in or create the ability to bring in a more broad set was a desire, which is why I think Todd highlighted specifically that yellow language to just really indicate that, as we fill spots for this committee, just to ask, is this really increasing the diversity of the committee, or is it continuing down the path of, maybe over focusing on one specific segment of the community? So I think that was just their desire, because at first they were talking about, like, maybe we should say 2 people with kids, 2 seniors, 2 of this, 2 of that, and I think, that got a little too specific, and so instead of going down that path, they ultimately chose to just put in some language about the principle of ensuring a diverse, well-rounded group of committee members.
Liam, did you have anything you want to add?
I don't think so. I think that Todd and John summarized at least as much as I knew about the subject. Yep. I guess the only question I would have is there generally, I presume that there's support among the committee for this. So it's really coming out of this, kind of organically coming out of the existing committee.
So the only other question I would have is for the group that's being added here, the rec advisory group. Are the folks that were on that, how are they feeling about being combined and formalizing this?
So this was just one committee. I think it looks like in the charge, Todd's just updated it to be more reflective of, I guess, what we've been calling ourselves more publicly, because it's been referred to as the Community Services and Recreation Advisory Board. It looks like we're just trying to make it Community Services Advisory Board.
Okay.
So I think they were all supportive. They all felt like it was the right path to add more membership. Adding the 2 students was an interesting conversation, because that wasn't even something that had come up very often, but it came up the last call or the last meeting, and I think it's a good idea to get the student input as much as we can into some of the programming.
Great.
Question then, so does that mean the rec advisory board will be disbanded?
No, it's the same board. I think it's just tweaking the name, which again, like I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could, it's just to simplify the name. Nothing in our our department says recreation, so everybody refers to as community service advisory board. So the intent was just to clean up who and what that group was about. And again, community services, as John mentioned, is youth, is senior, is adult, is beaches, is parks, is facilities, is passports. And so rather than just pick out the recreation piece, everything is covered under the first two, which really reflects our department as a whole. So.
And prior to this, right, Todd, it was prior to establishing what was formerly known as the Community Services and Recreation Advisory Board, there was the Recreation Advisory Board, and they added community services.
Yeah.
In
Yes.
the end of the 2000s. So this is just, again, I think the evolution of that to just more reflect, Todd's organization and all the services that Todd's team provides.
Right, and that's why I was asking, I was confused. I thought there was a separate entity called Rec Advisory Board.
That was prior to like 2000, and then
Okay.
they changed it to Community Services and Recreation.
So it's all in one.
Yep.
Just to clean up on the name and more of a.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think they've been operating this way for a while. It's a slightly separate issue with the other consolidation we'll be discussing in a minute. So, I mean, I think the question here is that that the process and timing for next steps. So we should talk a little bit about that. There's been some discussion. We had a similar committee change involving long-range planning about a year ago. And, in that case, I believe it went from rules and policies to the council. It didn't go directly to the council. I think with any combination like this, it makes sense for us to make sure we're vetting all the issues and we're not moving too quickly, and we're thinking through to make sure that the changes are going to be sustainable and effective. So with this, there's a question about whether it should go to ordinance next. I'm sure the ordinance committee, or to rules and policy. And you had a point of view on that, John. I thought we discussed that as a group.
Yeah, so last year we modified one of our ordinances to add in better language to make it clear that 302A, which this falls under 302A, would go to rules and policies, and they would be the body to govern. And I think that was something that Betsy, at the time as the chair, pushed to make sure that it was clear that when we're changing charges for committees, since rules and policy governs 100, 302, and then added 302A, we could just funnel these through rules and policy. So that was the intent of why we made that change, was to just create more of the clarity, because we had the same conversation of, is it go to ordinance? Does it go to rules and policy? Does it go to appointments and negotiations? And the intent was to clear that up by updating that particular ordinance.
Liam?
You can remind, who's the chair of Rules and Policy?
Jean Marie, right?
Jim Marie. And the other members are Councilor Johnson and April Sider. Councilor Ken Johnson.
Another question.
Go ahead.
Todd, is there any time sensitivity to this proposed change? Right now, it looks like we're fully staffed at the 5, and we have the 2 alternates. In your proposal, or the committee's proposal, will be to add those 2 alternates as full voting members and then appoint. Is there any time sensitivity to this one?
There is not, because the appointments committee fully staffed this previously. And so really it's just about trying to get more people active, but they still can get involved in the meetings as they're open meetings. Adding the high school students, we'd obviously like to do that probably in April or May to get folks on board before they go to a summer break. And so that would be the only piece that I'd see has any sort of urgency or timeline.
So I thought we had a discussion about the possibility of it going to rules and policies next, as a recommendation, and just confirm that we have consensus on that, and we'll just go from there. So, questions, comments?
I was going to make a motion that this move to rules and policy.
Okay,
Second.
all right. And the only other option is for it to go to ordinance. I'm not comfortable with it coming to ordinance because it addresses charter and also chapter 302, town council policies, both of which I think require a different body to do that. So do I have a second? We have a second? So let's take the vote on that to recommend that this goes to rules and policies. Exactly who's going to be chair of that meeting may be a bit of a question, but we'll go with that.
Yes.
Yes.
So let me just take the vote on that. Councilor Johnson,
Yes.
Councilor Anderson,
Yes.
and I'm in favor of that. So that's our recommendation, Todd. Hopefully that works for you, and thanks for your patience and persistence.
Sure. Could I just get a clarification on timeline? Because when I have my next committee report, what's the next step after that and where does it go so I can advise them as the group of where it goes from that next level?
So rules and policies does not have a standing meeting, so that's an ad hoc meeting. I think we could probably schedule that at any time, and then it could go directly to the council. And is it a first and second read for council or just one move? I don't know.
We can make it one move, right?
You may be able to make it one move. I'll have to go back to the discussion, to the point of discussion. I'll go back to look to see what we had to amend in 302 or 302A regarding long-range planning to see what we'll research that. Todd, I think the point is that we'll coordinate with the Rules and Policies Committee and get a meeting scheduled, hopefully this month, because I don't think it'll be a long meeting depending on schedules. And then once it goes to council, we'll clarify whether that's a first and second read, but perhaps as soon as the end of March, I would say.
Okay. And just for my own future, not that we're going to be changing charges anytime, but just so I'm educated, should I have addressed this to rules and policy instead of appointments committee? Is a starting point in the future?
No, so good question, Todd. This sort of came to us as a staffing issue, kind of on the heels of the other positions we staffed, I believe it was in December. So it was just a feeling that we needed to kind of pick up where we left off,
Okay.
Rather than have it, there would really be no way for us to recommend where it's going to go. So we thought we would just pick up where we left off, and that's not really adding any time, just trying to get it back on track.
Excellent.
I think it does raise an interesting question, though, more for clarity of once this is approved, it's approved. For anybody who's applied before, what's the process of reaching back out to folks to see if they're still interested, maybe if they're not already on the committee?
Yeah.
Or is it they have to reply? Like, how would that work?
I think we turn the crank again to see
Okay.
if there are any other, just to be fair, I don't think we could freeze the applicants. Your particular situation, Todd's a little bit different. But I think in either case, if we're going to make an error, we're going to make it in favor of publicizing it and making sure others are aware. We can certainly take a recommendation for a committee, but it is the responsibility of this committee to make recommendations, and it ultimately is the responsibility of the council to appoint.
Yeah.
Both great questions. I'll let them know folks that are interested in reapply, and we can re-advertise once this process is complete.
Because Tony would have records. Remember, we had a young lady come that wanted to apply and
Yes.
just lost out because of
Yes.
a better resume or something. Might want to reach back.
Yeah.
to her.
I was just thinking of even the application we're going to be reviewing later today. I think they had checked the box for this committee as well, which there's technically no vacancy.
Right.
But, in 2 months, there may be,
Right.
and do we go back to the past 6 months of applicants to say, hey, like more informally, hey, you applied before, maybe most of them are probably already on committees at this point, but would they want to put their name back in the
And Tony
hat?
does that.
Tony does that
Normal
as a
course
matter
of
of course.
business, I think, as things
Yeah.
come through. She's really good at that.
Okay.
Yeah, just to, I guess, echoes, currently there are no vacancies until
Yeah.
the composition changes, then we go back. I guess I would be curious to hear from Ms. Justice what her practice has been with regard to people who submit interest. There's no opportunity at the time. They should go back in that 6 months.
Right.
I think the other thing, which just made me think of it, and this is a bit removed, so I apologize, Councilor Hamel,
You're
but
fine.
the one thing that we did bring up and just made me think about in that process was maybe looking at our whole process for application to be appointed to various committees. I think there's some discussion we've had about, do we consider public comment on from an applicant in a meeting? I think maybe going back could be on a, we can get to that future agenda items, I guess.
And I would add to that, and not to complicate it further, but I think there's a big opportunity for process improvement, not only from the standpoint of generating applicant flow, but also from the standpoint of educating newly appointed committee members on the role of the committee, their role, quick turn on Robert's rules, because a lot of these changes I think are great, but if we're not really strictly adhering to some discipline around, doing roll call votes, raise hands, and that sort of thing, there could be some confusion with alternate and associate members, which are under discussion, who may not have voting rights. So I think those two things, the front end, sort of filling the bucket, but also getting people focused and geared. And Betsy had raised this, when she was on the committee, and it's a good point. We just never really got to it. But, okay, so thanks, Todd. That's Community Services Advisory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for Jamie for carrying the load in the next topic, as I have to go to my next one. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I think with that, we'll bring Jamie in. Hi, Jamie. Welcome.
Hey
there. And I owe you a couple of things. One is a compliment on your persistence and patience, and an apology for us sort of losing the thread on this prior to the holidays. So thank you for joining, and we appreciate your good work and staying with us and this whole effort. So thank you.
Sure, happy to do it.
So why don't you give us the windup on this? This one's a little more complicated. So, and I always hate saying that, but it's a fact. It's just like, there's more to this.
Do you have that memo to pull up?
Yeah, you want to walk us through the materials that you prepared, Jamie, which I thought were very helpful.
Sure, I'll give you a little background too. So way back in 2019, Tom Hall approached me asking if there would be an opportunity to consolidate PMAC with one of the other committees, as the council had taken on the task of looking at reducing the number of advisory committees that the town has. It seemed to make the most sense to work with the Conservation Commission and the PMAC. So let me say PMAC, it stands for Pest Management Advisory Committee. They are charged with overseeing the town's implementation of their organic pest management policy. And so their mission kind of aligned best from what our analysis looked at with the Conservation Commission, because they're dealing with land use, pollutants and things like that through their daily or their work. So we moved forward, Todd and I moved forward meeting with Conservation Commission and PMAC separately to kind of introduce the idea. Things kind of got a bit derailed in 2020, like most things did. And then we kind of got back on track in the spring of 2021 and had some joint meetings with the leadership of the two groups. And both agreed that after some consideration that it made sense, and that public participation in PMAC was dwindling. We had a couple open spots in Conservation Commission. And it happened also that during COVID times, and because we didn't have a remote meeting policy on Conservation Commission, we had a hard time meeting a quorum. And so we had several months where we were unable to meet because we just didn't have the participation that we needed. So it really was a perfect opportunity to bring in some new folks, the PMAC folks, hopefully, since there are some longtime members who are committed to the pest management policy and seeing that implemented. And there's a lot of interest on the Conservation Commission in land care, organic land care. So it was, there were some synergies there, and they felt like it would be a good fit. So ultimately, the two groups both decided in their last meetings of 2021 that they would like to move forward and recommend to the council that the two groups be merged. And in doing that, We are also recommending the addition of 2 alternate spots on the Conservation Commission. Conservation Commission is set up in state rules, and there are certain stipulations that need to be met. And one of them is that it's a 7-member body. We are asking that we have 2 additional members serve as alternates so that they could serve as voting members if we lacked a quorum. And I know that there was some question about the revised Conservation Commission charge, and we did have that reviewed by the town's legal counsel so that he could compare what was being proposed with what the state rules say, and he did find that they were in alignment. So we felt pretty comfortable moving forward with our recommendation to council. And like I said, it's been a very long process, so I may have forgotten things that you were hoping that I would touch on. So feel free to ask me questions if I did leave anything out.
Okay, and I should point out that April Sider is the town council liaison, and I know she's attended your meetings and actually attended the December 13th meeting. My apologies for that not getting on the ordinance committee agenda for that month, but we really didn't have a chance to socialize everything that is included in your recommendation. So with that, I'd like to take a couple of minutes and walk through some of the issues that are involved here. So I don't know if Councilor Johnson or Councilor Anderson would like to lead off here, and I can help guide the discussion.
I'll lead off because I read the memo, good memo. I got a little confused because this sounds like it's, or it looks on the surface to me that this is a 2-prong request. Number 1, consolidate, expand, and then also adjust the authority. Is that true?
So,
Jamie, you can help. Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Sure. So we did need, in order to maintain the mission of the PMAC and make sure that that wasn't lost in consolidation, we did update kind of the roles and responsibilities a bit of the Conservation Commission so that it did specify that they would serve as the Pest Management Advisory Committee and oversee the town's, or advise the town on its implementation of the pest management policy. The Pest Management Advisory Committee does not have a charge, so to speak. They were set up as part of the town's organic pest policy, and that is where kind of their roles and responsibility live. And because of that, we are recommending an update to both documents, the Conservation Commission charge, as well as the town's organic pest management policy, so that they are consistent with each other.
Jamie, can I just ask a clarifying question real quick? So
Sure.
The current commission is only 7 members with no alternates, and the only change is adding 2 alternates that could vote if there's no quorum.
Correct.
Correct? Okay.
And so I spent a little time looking at this and going back to the state statute, which basically says that the municipal officers can appoint at least 3, but not more than 7. And the terminology they use is conservation commissioners. And they also stipulate, it can be appointed for terms of 1, 2, and 3 years. Are you expecting they would all be 3-year terms? Jamie, is that what the committee's considering?
So it's been practice that just like with the town's other advisory committees, that if people wish to stay on the commission, that they are reappointed, but yes, for 3-year terms.
Okay, so there's that. And then the other thing, I don't think there's really anything in the statute, and again, I'm not an attorney, but my working understanding is that whatever is not stipulated by the state statute is, it can be determined by home rule. Is that right? As long as it's not in violation of the...
There's some flexibility as long as it's not inconsistent with the state law.
Yeah. So, and I think this might be a good time to talk about the legal review and the issues that were raised by Phil Saucio. If that makes sense, Jamie, would you do you have that handy to be able to refer to?
I don't, but I think I remember most of it. So he was suggesting that state statute does allow for associate members of the Conservation Commission be appointed for a short amount of time, as long as they are needed, and they would have no voting authority. I believe that remained in the proposed updated charge that was provided to you. But we are asking for 2 additional members to be appointed as alternates who could serve or could be delegated voting authority if we didn't have a quorum of the full members. So that was one issue that he suggested we just take out reference to associate members, and we kind of see them as 2 separate things. That we would need alternates, but we may take on a topic where we do want to bring in some subject matter expert at some point in time, and they may serve longer than a meeting or 2, and so the council may wish to appoint them as associate members. The other one was related to categorizing and maintaining a list of the town's conservation and open space lands, and suggested that if the Conservation Commission wasn't doing that, then some other entity in town should be doing that. And we moved that from a required duty to an additional duty that the commission may take on. I think that it would be fine to move it back if the council so wanted. And the commission is in the process of beginning to look at the town's conserved lands and open space, because it seems like that is something that group hadn't done recently anyway. And it's something that we need to be looking at because it doesn't seem like others are looking at it in town as well. Literally just looked at a draft map that our GIS administrator provided to me earlier today related to that topic.
So let's take that last issue next, if we could, the issue of the responsibility to maintain a listing of land. And, you know, as I recall, there was something that when we went through the comprehensive plan update, you know, there was definitely a lot of time spent about, you know, the open spaces that we have and so forth. And I would think that would be a planning department function, potentially, a role for who would be responsible for maintaining that, not necessarily the one of the committee. So again, I'm not trying to problem solve, but that's sort of an open question for me.
It might be a joint venture between planning and assessing, because a lot of conservation easements and whatnot do have tax implications. So assessing often has some of that information more readily available than planning would.
So that's definitely something we're going to need a little more work on. And Liam, is that something that you can take up as a you know, task to help us with some guidance on
I
that?
can certainly help coordinate in response to that.
Yeah, and we'll get to this in a minute, everybody. But the next step would be to talk about similar to the other issue we had with community services and rec advisory. What's the next step in the appropriate body or bodies to, you know, to deal with this? So we'll come back to that. I want to make sure though that everybody's comfortable with this alternate versus associate members. There's no reference to alternates in the state statute. I think that Jamie did a great job of explaining their rationale for what they've done. But also the state statute talks about up to 7 members. So if you're adding 2 alternate members that would vote in the absence of a full voting member, that technically doesn't change the number of voters, right? So, I mean, it seems to me that it still fulfills the intent of the statute without really being, you know, contrary to that. So, Liam, I don't know, you're kind of geared on stuff like this, but, you know, a lot of this is judgment, but a lot of it is, you know, I'd like to hear what people have to say. Thanks.
Yeah, it's just the role of an alternate, regardless of the committee you are, right? You're there in case there's an absence. If you roll in, you are now a voting member. So, pretty straightforward.
Jamie, did town legal council speak to that or answer that question or that concern around whether having alternate members in addition to 7 regular members was inconsistent with state statute?
That question was specifically asked, and he said that it did not conflict with the state statute. And
Thank you.
his email should be in the packet of materials that you received
It is.
also.
Yeah, it's on page 36. It's item number 2, organization or membership, alternate members.
Yep.
And it's in Phil's note here. So,
I was
so
just gonna say, I think hearing that and knowing legal did the review,
Right.
to me makes me feel like they're more qualified than I am to make that call. So if they're comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it.
the other thing that I think we were talking about is this. So we addressed the issue of keeping the list of the land, whose responsibility that is. And the language about shall versus may. I think if, the idea of like assigning accountability, assigning it to more than one person, I've always had a problem with that. So I'd like to have one focal point. And there were a couple of other questions I had on this. So one had to do with the practical effect of what you're proposing. As I understand it, the pest management function was they maintained a list of pesticides and insecticides that were not to be used primarily on municipal land. And what you're proposing here actually is going to be expanding that scope to include all land in town, public and private. So that wasn't really clear in all the materials, but can we spend a minute talking about that?
So the intent wasn't to expand it to all land in town because it's still to oversee the policy, and the organic pest management policy specifically applies to town land only. I would say that there are commissioners who are interested in seeing restrictions expand to to all area of town or specific areas of town in addition to town property, but that could not be covered under the pest management policy. That would have to be an ordinance that the town implements.
But because you're combining, it does seem to me that then the responsibility for doing that and also the leadership direction and the ability to influence that would come from conservation, the newly comprised conservation committee. So, I would want to have a very clear idea, and they're speaking now as a counselor and not just a committee person. I think we would really need to spend a little time talking about that.
Councilor Himmel, can you point where in there, I'm assuming it's the update and the policy where you're.
Well,
Where
it's
that's mentioned?
it's on page 22 in the packet, and it's under the section called Duties and Powers of the Conservation Committee. It was in the section on keeping an index of open areas, but it goes on to say the Conservation Commission may recommend to the town council or any municipal body or any body, politic, or public agency a program for better protection, development, or use of those areas, which may include the acquisition of conservation easements. So that looks to me like it's new language and does seem like an expansion of scope a little bit beyond what the pest management scope was. And I know this is not really a topic that maybe it's not a legal question, but conversation with, and I don't want to take others' names in vain, but in conversation with a couple of other counselors, people had expressed some consternation about that.
Jamie, can you provide some background on where this language came from? Was this in there previously that you moved down here? Because you mentioned you had moved some of this language around, I thought.
The only item that was moved was the information about categorizing conserved land and open space. The rest of it, if it was not tracked as a change, was in there originally.
So it's original language, but the thing I'm after is now that it's combined, isn't it possible that takes on new meaning and new scope? And if so, does that require us to have further discussion about it and make sure we're clear, what with the intended and perhaps unintended consequences of some of those wording. Yeah, Councilor Johnson.
Yeah, no, I would probably be one of those that immediately reading, because when I did the other day, I thought that. However, it is just, may recommend to the town council, right? Which would have to, again, then probably be an ordinance. So, I mean, what's stopping any committee from recommending anything to the council? Nothing really, right? So, you said this is original language. I'm seeing it in green. Does green mean it's ported over from somewhere else? I don't have my
Green
color
versus
code.
red line.
Yeah.
Green usually means it was just moved from one part of the the section to another.
For once? Okay.
But my point here is, I don't mean to, go down a rat hole on this. The language is the same, but the effect of the language is different now that you've incorporated, or you're proposing incorporating, pest management, because the Conservation Commission is the enforcement authority. That's my point.
Okay.
So again, I'm not, trying to dance on the head of a pin here, but that is, I read this closely, and others have actually flagged this as as an issue. Not that we're looking for, for obstacles for you to, additional obstacles for you to jump over. We just want to make sure that we're, we understand the intent. A lot of times this doesn't get determined when we're drafting the things, and then later we, but we have a job to do to figure out what was intended.
So just so I understand, Councilor Hamel, so the question is, the charge under the Pest Management Committee is unchanged, but the authority of the Conservation Committee is inherently different and can have a greater effect. So the question is, okay, so is that something that Phil has spoken to at all, Jamie, to your knowledge, that question about like incorporating the same sort of charge and expectation from pest management, which was purely advisory, to conservation? Now there's a inherently change. Is that anything that Phil spoke to or flagged?
I don't believe that he did.
Okay, so that would be the question for legal counsel.
Yeah.
Does that change that? Okay.
Thank you for refining that. So your words are better than mine. So
No, it's a good point. That's a good
Councilor
point you
Johnson.
made. You're right. I mean, it comes under a different umbrella under the Conservation Commission. So, yeah.
So I don't know if there are any other questions or comments, but those are the things that, we've spent some time on this. I know everyone's read it closely, and we know you and your committee have given this a lot of thought, and, we appreciate all of your good work. And the fact that, as I understand it, even though your groups are not meeting together, that the pest management group did unanimously recommend the combination. I know they had some questions, but it seemed like they were resolved. Can you help me with that, Jamie? You probably closer to it than anybody.
Sure. Yeah. So the PMAC, I would say, initially had some trepidation about combining. Their biggest concern was that their work would not be lost. So I think that, hearing from the members of the Conservation Commission and hearing their interest in the work that the PMAC has been doing for the past 10 years, and also the members' interest and commitment to seeing the policy be maintained, that definitely put their mind at ease. They also felt like having the Conservation Commission, which is well established and more well known in town probably than the PMAC, may amplify the issue of organic land care a bit more than they're able to do on their own. So both groups were in favor of moving forward with consolidation.
Thank you. Thanks. Councilor Johnson.
So, I think I learned something from the document, because when I hear pesticides, just the average person thinks of ants and grubs and everything. But that also includes herbicides, correct? For dandelions, and so I learned something.
Yeah.
Which was good. So what would be this is still a two-step process then, right? Because you have the expansion or consolidation, which would go to, again, rules of policy, or would that go right to ordinance?
We thought with this one, it could go to ordinance. or it could go through rules and policy, but either one would go through a committee step and then to the council.
Mhm.
So,
I guess what I would propose is that if we just decided that the proposed change to rec advisory should go rules and policies, and this is still under 302A, I would propose we follow the same path. I think that if there's a recommendation out of appointments and negotiations this evening for rules and policies to take up the proposed change in charge and consolidation, you do so with the caveats that you noted this evening. So the question about does the adopted charge from PMAC to conservation inherently change the authority to impose restrictions in that regard, as well as the other questions that Councilor Hamel and others flagged. So that sort of discussion can carry forward to rules and policies for consideration there before going to the council for an ultimate discussion. So everyone at this table will still have an opportunity to speak to those issues, but the hope would be that those questions would be answered through rules and policies with a recommendation to council.
yeah, again, I have no, particular interest at this go. I'm pretty much agnostic in terms of what the next step would be for committee, more additional technical committee review, but I'd be very comfortable with it going to rules and policy. Now
Keep it
that's,
consistent.
yeah.
But that would just be the expansion with the addition of the alternates and not the addition of some of the verbiage that we just.
And I think it would be both.
I think
It would be both.
I think it would be both. I think the expectation is 302A changes to 302A would all go to rules and policies.
So then we have to get a legal opinion on the item of
Right,
interest.
authority, yes. Yep, and I think that, again, I think the recommendation out of appointments negotiation should be for rules and policies to take up the proposed changes to 302A with regard to conservation and pest management with a flag consideration for the questions in the discussion. I mean, obviously, this is going to be carried forward by staff. It will be a televised meeting. I think that whether that all needs to be in the recommendation and action, I don't know, probably not. It's probably too lengthy as it is, but I think that those things do need to be resolved before they come to council.
You don't think they should be resolved before they go to appointments, rules, and,
Before they go to rules and policies?
yeah,
I think that might add a step that, I think those questions need to be resolved.
okay.
And I just want to point out in terms of authority that the Conservation Commission is also just an advisory group. So they really don't have the authority to set any kind of policy or anything like that that would affect anything beyond their, four walls in a meeting. I mean, like Robert Rules policy and things like that, they can certainly set those. But in terms of how anything that they do would affect kind of private property in town, all of those decisions are made at the council level. Nothing that comes out of Conservation Commission can impact town rules, town laws, ordinances.
Because what I'm hearing is the assumption, and I don't know because I haven't read the state law, that the Conservation Commission has more authority than our existing committees do. But based on what Jamie just said, it sounds like their powers don't exceed
Still
anything.
advisory.
Yeah. So in that case, I still think it's probably worth confirming with legal, getting their alignment that yes, there is no actual additional authority. Just to make sure we've covered our bases with state law and anything, but if what Jamie just said is correct, then I wouldn't be concerned with this moving forward as is, but I think we should still confirm that.
Yeah, I think it's got to go through a town council committee before going to the council.
I agree.
And I think that, it could go either way. I don't have any particular, dog in the fight in terms of whether it goes to ordinance or goes to rules and policies. Rules and policies, I think, have tended to deal with more technical issues, and have gone a little bit deeper on things. I think ordinance, it's not clear to me the scope of, where to draw the line between ordinance and rules and policy. So, Liam, you have a view on that. But.
No, and Jamie likely is absolutely correct. I think the point is it's been flagged as a question, which we should resolve at the next stage before it comes to council. I think that, I guess my comments would be that I think Councilor Anderson is absolutely correct that Councilor Gleistein recommended that changes to 100, 302, and 302A should go through rules and policies as opposed to ordinance, even though they're all represented as ordinances. I think my other comment would be that ordinance always generally has a very full plate. And I think if there's some work that can be taken off that and dispatched to another community, we should look to do that.
Right.
So why don't we just resolve that one question through rules and policies and then bring it forward to the council? I think my other question I would just have for Jamie is same question we asked Todd Souza. What is the time consideration and where these two committees stand with the proposed merger?
So I would say that the timing issue is more of a PMAC stressor than Conservation Commission. So a lot of the PMAC's work focuses on maintenance plans and reviewing maintenance plans for the coming growing season for the town's parks and open spaces. And so that's when they are reviewing the plans that Todd brings to them and reviewing any waiver requests for pesticide use. And they're usually the body that makes the recommendation to Tom Hall about whether or not to grant the use of a waiver if there is a specific pest issue that organic methods can't deal with effectively. So really, it's too bad Todd had to leave early because he could really speak to that since he's the one that will be most impacted by that. Both of the, there are currently just a couple active members of PMAC and they have said that they are fine to reconvene this spring if they need to. They were just hoping that we could kind of move forward as a consolidated body with Conservation Commission. But again, they've been made aware that we have kind of, the timeline has increased a little bit and that they may have to reconvene PMAC separately for the spring to do some PMAC work that would have been done conjoined with the Conservation Commission had this process played out a little bit faster.
So in theory, they could still do like a joint PMAC Conservation Commission workshop, right, to facilitate that review. So they can still do it together. It just might not be, it might be two bodies coming together versus one body.
They could potentially. I think that also there were some members of PMAC who were planning on stepping down and in their mind may have already done that because they chose in November or voted in November to move forward with the recommendation for consolidation. But Todd's aware of that and I think he may have already reached out to let them know that they may need to reconvene for a meeting this spring.
Liam?
When do they typically receive the request for waivers, Jamie? What time of the spring?
It's usually March or April, I believe.
Okay. So yes, I think they could convene as a joint committee. I think, however, as long as the committees stand on their own, pest management's the only one that would weigh in on that question.
Yeah. But if they don't have quorum because they don't have membership, then they can.
Then that is potentially an issue.
Yeah.
So any further questions or comments? But it sounds like we have a consensus. So can I get a motion to recommend this to the next committee step? Sounds like rules and policies, and then on to the council in some expeditious fashion, if possible.
I'll make a motion that this be moved to the Rules and Policies Committee at the first available time slot.
Okay, second.
Second.
And we'll take the vote on that. Councilor Johnson?
Yes.
Yes.
Councilor Anderson, and I'm in favor of that. And won't the chair of the Rules and Policies Committee be so happy to find out?
Well, this should be just one round.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, they could probably handle both at the same meeting, but no, that's up to them.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
To Liam's point. Does this need a first and second read, or we can waive the first read if we wanted to and just do a public hearing and second read together, or how does that work?
That's one of the homework assignments out of this evening's meeting is determine what the process is once it comes out of committee.
Okay, and what we would have to do if we wanted to try and expedite both, just to make sure that we can move them forward.
Yeah, I think that we'll see how quickly we get a rules and policies meeting pulled together for these two agenda items and discussions. And then I expect that it likely will be the first reading in March, and the question is whether it's a two-step process or not. So Jamie, that's probably as quick as we could for a timeline would be first meeting in March, got everything approved and resolved.
Thanks a lot, Jamie. Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks very much. We've got one staffing item that we spend some time on that, and then we'll talk about next meeting agenda items. So I'll give you a minute to pull up your worksheet, and this one should be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, okay, no, I can't find that one.
Uh,
Hold on a second. Came out from Toby.
We have a worksheet, and then there's a Exhibit A.
Yep.
So the worksheet, just to recap, and I just shut the thing down as soon as okay, just to set the stage for this. There are 2 vacancies, Board of Assessment Review. There's 1 vacancy for second alternate. And an application has been submitted by Leroy Crockett. And there's a recommendation on that. I'll come back to that in a minute. Housing Alliance, there are 2 vacancies on this committee, 2 full voting members, and 1 application submitted again, the only candidate, Mr. Leroy Crockett. So let's have some discussion about that. These are 2 key committees. Mr. Crockett is well known in terms of, how he's contributed to and served the town in various capacities. He's a hard worker and very dedicated and responsible committee member. Go ahead.
I think that kind of wraps it up.
So can I have a recommendation?
I move that we approve the recommended appointment.
Okay.
Second.
So those would be appointing Mr. Crockett to the vacancy on Board of Assessment Review. He'd be the second alternate with a term to expire 2022. And for Mr. Crockett, the same, to fill the position of a full voting member on the Housing Alliance Committee, term to expire 2024. And any further discussion? If not, we'll take a vote. Councilor Johnson,
Yes.
Councilor Anderson,
Yes.
and I'm in favor of this as well. And we look forward to Mr. Crockett signing on for 2 roles and 2 new tours of duty. Thank you.
Was this a filling of what we're on the Housing Alliance? Must have been, right?
I don't know what position created the vacancy.
I think there were a few that were created. From what I recall, when we filled them in December, there were a couple of vacancies for people leaving that we didn't have full applications for.
So if these are, if these are approved by council, there will only be one full voting member position remaining on the Housing Alliance. Apparently, there's still one available. And it looks like the Board of Assessment Review is full, including alternates. So the other vacancies that would remain, ADA Advisory, there are 3 full voting members that are open. Senior Advisory Board, there's 1 full voting member, and alternates, first and second alternates, 1 each. And there is 1 alternate position available for the Shellfish Conservation Commission.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, so, it's a handful, it's not a small handful. So nice to have a fully staffed team. So
The ADA Advisory Committee does not meet very often, or
no,
No, I'm the liaison on that, and I don't think they've met in 3 years.
okay. Surprised Housing Alliance, there's not more, given the results of the survey and how many people mentioned they cared about housing, that might be one to kind of get out.
Yeah.
And communicate a little bit more.
I think once we start talking about that, with the upcoming agenda items, probably going to generate some interest. Yep, hopefully for the council, from the council.
Yep.
Any ideas or suggestions for agenda items for the next month's meeting, the March meeting?
You would mention something,
Yeah.
right? You would mention the
Onboarding, kind of
onboarding,
right? There was that, and then there was also the applicant flow, how robust is our process and things we could do to improve that. There's one other one we were talking about. It escapes me at the
The
moment.
process of the application, public comment, coming to meetings and.
Oh, yeah, good one.
Yes.
Good one. Great recall. That's the one where I think maybe we need some ground rules for that. It used to be no one attended these meetings. I think in the 3 years that I served in the last round, we had two meetings that I can recall where anyone ever joined from the outside over the full 3 years. It was, pretty dead. But with Zoom and with renewed interest in the committees, I think it's really important for us to figure out what ground rules we should have in terms of allowing people to come and speak, but also being respectful of having some ability to speak freely about backgrounds and, not have it turn on someone who shows up and recommends themselves and, person who may not show up or not fill out the application properly, not have the same chance.
Right.
So that's a problem statement.
Yep.
Lynn.
Yeah, I think that other municipalities, I think, often handle committee and board appointment applications in executive session.
Yeah.
So there can be some more free flow discussion about merits or concerns or things like that, and that's absolutely a category under state statute for an executive session. I think that if we're not prepared to go that step, I certainly think that we should. Again, I think that question of can I speak on my own behalf about my application? I think we need to probably determine whether that's something we would want to be receptive to or not.
Right.
I think that just in that, it's a really interesting example because I think that individual also flagged some concerns with how clear the application was in terms of qualifications and listing those things, and perhaps they omitted some things I think would be relevant, just not be familiar with it. So I do think that could be a healthy discussion. I don't have any recommendations, but I think that those are kind of some of the high points to what a discussion should look like. But I think the other one that came up was, and again, I think our town clerk can provide at least what the existing practice is, but with regard to someone who completes an application, particularly with the electronic application, how long do we consider their application?
Yeah.
Is that 6 months from submittal? Is that 12 months from submittal? I think, just and again, this was right in the chair's experience professionally. What is our obligation to consider an application after a period of time? And is there someone who, even though there's no financial gain to be held, oftentimes there's in the negative, but is there going to be a foul alleged if we don't consider someone's application when there wasn't a vacancy at the time, but 9 months later there was, and we overlooked their application? So just process this.
Well, almost like to your point, like is not selecting them at the time of when there is a vacancy, a signal that the decision's been made, and if you want to apply, you reapply. So I like little nuances like that, which are getting in the nitty gritty, but I think will matter just to have clarity, right? Not just for us, but for like future.
Yeah, you even accommodate that on the application itself. So
Yeah.
That's why it'd be a good discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely opportunity for tightening the process. If we reflect on it for a minute, I mean, we had a different set of problems several years ago. We had a lot of vacancies, and we had done a lot of time getting people energized. I don't know what we can attribute the researchers of interest. I like to try to take personal credit for all of it, but it's.
I think Allison had quite a bit to do with it.
So, but it's great. We have another set of issues now. We got plenty of interest now. It's a matter of being fair and being open, but also, having some rigor to the process and some confidentiality, I suppose. So
One of my concerns, and I'll speak for myself, just like personally with COVID. I think when COVID happened, people had more time to do things, and because we were virtual, my concern is more, are we going to see people once things continue to get back to normal, when they have to go in the office, when they have other commitments, are they going to stay? And so it's almost more of like, what's the retention strategy to make sure that we're keeping these people engaged, that they see the value in what they're doing, so we don't run that risk. But I could see some people you know, deciding, okay, you know, this is more time than I have to give right now because pre-COVID, it was too hard and it's gonna get hard again. So maybe I'm being a little too worried, but I just have a concern that, you know.
It's kind of like
Fair
all the
question.
dogs that are going to the shelter now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
We saw a lot.
Everyone got
yeah.
a dog and, yeah, all the dogs are
Sad.
taking care of them, yeah.
Which one are the?
So we'll have those three things added
Yep.
to the agenda for next time. Otherwise, if there's anything else, we'll just look for a motion to adjourn. Other comments?
Suggestions, which I'm gonna do, I think. I'm gonna actually go fill an application out.
Oh, great.
So I experience what it is. See if I can find the thing, the whole 9 yards. Give you a
Great.
feedback. I move that, we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right, and we'll take a vote on that. Councilor Johnson,
Yes.
Councilor Anderson,
Yes.
I'm in favor of that. So we're adjourning 6:36 PM.